Oregon's 82nd legislative session began in January and is scheduled to go until June. Even though legislators have already accomplished quite a bit, there is still much more to be done before sine die. Oregon is dealing with critical issues from homelessness to Oregon's semiconductor industry. And here to bring us up to date on this legislative session is House Majority Leader Democrat Julie Fahey, representing West Eugene and Veneta. Representative Fahey, welcome to Eye on Northwest Politics.
Thanks for having me.
One of the biggest pieces of legislation that you've already passed so far is the $200 million homeless package. What will that do to deal with the homeless problem we face?
So I really appreciate you asking the question. Housing and homelessness are the top priorities of the Oregon legislature this session, and they're bipartisan priorities. We know that homelessness affects every community around the state. So we took very rapid action early on in session to pass our Affordable Housing and Emergency Homelessness Response Package. That is both investments, but importantly, it's also policy changes. And the funding and the policies that we passed will help get people off the streets, on the path out of homelessness into shelter. It will fund shelter beds, outreach workers, and rapid rehousing funding for people who are living on the streets. But importantly, it will also address some of the root causes of homelessness, including youth homelessness, evictions, and making housing production one of our top priorities in the state.
When should we start to see some of the results of this legislation?
Our communities around the state are working very quickly to develop plans for how to use the funding. They've submitted plans to the governor's office about how many shelter beds they will be able to create, how many people they will be able to serve with the rapid rehousing funds. Those plans are being considered by the governor's office, and she's already announced funding going to specific areas. My community, for example, Lane County, will get over $15 million to help fund those initiatives. And I know that our city and county and nonprofit organizations are ready to put that money to work right away.
What's your take on the governor insisting on accountability from Portland and Multnomah County specifically regarding how their share of the money is going to be spent?
I think it's great. One of the things that I like about the governor's approach to her emergency declaration of emergency for homelessness is that the approach we're taking is focused on outcomes and accountability. We all know that the status quo is not working on addressing homelessness in this state. We can't just keep continuing to do the same things that we are doing. And so the funding that the legislature approved and the approach the governor is taking will require our communities to commit to specific outcomes. How many shelter beds? How many people are moved off the streets? How many evictions are being prevented? That is incredibly important. We know that, and her approach also is requiring local governments, cities and counties and other local governments and community organizations to work together in a different and more collaborative way. So I'm really hopeful this will mean. We will see a real difference in terms of the folks living on our streets.
Another big piece of legislation, $210 million to lure chip manufacturers, and authorizing the governor to expand the urban growth boundary if a company needs that land to locate or expand. Why will that work?
Well, we know that the semiconductor industry is incredibly important in the state of Oregon. We are the #3 producer of semiconductors chips in the entire world. So it's an important industry for our state, and we have an incredible opportunity with the Federal CHIPS Act to help draw down additional investments into our state, into this industry, so that we can expand and grow. The two important parts of the Senate Bill 4, the Oregon CHIPS Act that you referenced, are funding. The states are required to invest in the company's applications for the federal money. So we have shown a commitment in this state to that industry, which will bring good jobs to our state, and the land use piece. And we know that industrial land is something that some semiconductor companies are looking for. So giving the governor some time-limited authority to help make that land available if a company needs it for its application with the federal government to be successful is very important.
What do you say to critics who say expanding the urban growth boundary defeats the purpose of protecting farmland, forests, and also limiting urban sprawl?
I would say that the authority that we gave to the governor has very important sideboards on it. For one, it is time limited. It's only for a relatively narrow period of time in order to help the companies be successful with their applications to the federal government. If a company is not successful, if a governor issues the executive order and that land is brought into the UGB and the company is not successful, that land then comes out of the UGB again. It's also limited in terms of the total number of sites that will be allowed statewide. The governor would only be able to do this 8 times. So there was a very significant back and forth between our land use advocates, our economic development folks, and the semiconductor industry about what do we really need and how can we do this in a thoughtful and deliberative way. And I think the bill that we passed threads that needle in an effective way.
We've seen challenges in other states to abortion rights and transgender care ever since Roe v. Wade was struck down. House Bill 2002 is being considered to solidify those rights in Oregon. Are you in favor of this, and why?
I am in favor of it. As you mentioned, Roe v. Wade was overturned last year, and because of that, we undertook a pretty deliberative process in the legislature leading up to this session to make sure that abortion in Oregon is both a legally enshrined right and that it's accessible and affordable for Oregonians. So we asked the question, what will change for Oregonians given that federal rule? You know, one of the things that we're seeing is an increasing number of people coming to our state to access abortion care, which means that our providers are, it can be more difficult to get an appointment, and our providers are, struggling to keep up. So the bill, House Bill 2002, will help protect our medical providers and our healthcare facilities, given this new legal environment. It will ensure that the rights we had in Oregon before Roe was overturned are protected, and it will help make sure Oregonians have access to care given the changing landscape in other states.
We've seen high-profile mass shootings lately across the country, and there are several gun control bills in the legislature right now, even as Measure 114 is still hung up in the courts. Where are we on gun control in the legislature and in the state of Oregon?
Well, we know that in this session, a top priority for us is to make sure that our communities and our schools are safer. And a part of that is taking on gun crimes and violence. We are going to be investing in violence prevention efforts in the legislature, making sure the state police have the resources they need to do their jobs. But we also are considering a bill, the Violence Prevention Bill, House Bill 2005, that offers some common sense solutions to help keep guns out of the wrong hands, what's so-called ghost guns, that unserialized guns that are often used for illegal purposes, that will help law enforcement do their jobs and will prioritize public safety. So we are working on that bill to help reduce gun violence in this state.
We've got less than a minute to go. Representative Fahey, what would you say would be the other major issue that the legislature will be dealing with before you adjourn in June?
I think the one thing that I wanted to highlight is the support that our schools need. You know, we've had a challenging few years in our schools and our with the pandemic, and it's extremely important that the legislature fulfill one of its primary responsibilities, which is to provide safe and stable and sufficient funding for our education system. And so that the budget process, you know, we're in the second half of session now, and we're starting to undertake those budget conversations. And that will definitely be something I'm looking for. And also, how can we support our educator workforce this session? Make sure that we're attracting and retaining teachers to our schools in Oregon and supporting them as needed. And then finally, something that I'm really personally very excited about is the Early Literacy Success Initiative. We know that our reading scores for our kids are not where they need to be. And so making some significant investments in early literacy this session and making sure our kids are learning to read in a way that's aligned with the science, that's something I'm particularly excited about us taking on in the second half of the session.
Representative Julie Fahey, thanks for joining us on Eye on Northwest Politics, and we hope to talk to you again before the session ends.
Thanks for having me.